Call 911 now. She's turning blue, Bernard Kellerman shouted as he dropped his mop onto the floor and sprinted forward. Gasps erupted across the executive boardroom. Just minutes earlier, Alexandra Ashcroft, the billionaire CEO of Ashcroft Holdings in the heart of Philadelphia, had been standing at the head of the long oak conference table, her voice firm and steady as she presented the quarterly numbers. Then, mid-sentence, she stopped. Her hand rose to her chest. Her breath faltered. The room plunged into a terrifying silence as her body convulsed once, twice, then collapsed to the floor. At first, no one believed it. The executives froze. 7 men and women in suits worth more than Bernard earned in an entire year. Someone muttered, "She's joking." Another whispered, "Oh God, call security." Then the truth hit. Alexandra Ashcroft wasn't moving. Her lips were turning purple. But Bernard didn't hesitate. He pushed through the door, forcing his way past a wall of expensive perfume and luxury suits. "Bernard! What are you doing?" someone barked. "You don't belong in here," another snapped. "Get out." "I know CPR," Bernard shouted, but no one cared. Alexandra lay on her side, one arm limp across her chest, her lips shifting into a terrifying gray blue. She wasn't breathing. Bernard dropped to his knees beside her. "Ms. Ashcroft, can you hear me?" he whispered, panic rising in his throat. He pressed 2 fingers to her neck. No pulse. Then he acted. He had once taken a free CPR class at the West Philadelphia Community Center just to get a food voucher. But in this moment, the instructor's voice echoed louder in his mind than anything else in that room. "If they're not breathing, you are their lungs." He tilted her head back, pinched her nose, and leaned down. "Is he kissing her?" someone shrieked. "That's disgusting," another cried. "Get him off her!" A sharp pain tore across Bernard's back. Someone had swung something hard. Maybe a security baton, maybe an umbrella. Straight into him. He groaned, but he didn't stop. He continued. 2 breaths, then he locked his hands together. Chest compressions. 1, 2, 3, 4. Another blow landed hard on his shoulder. He winced, but he kept counting, kept pressing. "You filthy janitor," someone hissed. "Don't touch her." The boardroom exploded into chaos around him, but Bernard stayed anchored. His arms burned, his back throbbed, his eyes stung. But he did not stop. "Don't," he whispered through clenched teeth. "Don't die like this." 25, 26, 27. Someone grabbed his shoulder and yanked him back. Bernard tore himself free, continued compressions, then leaned down for 2 more breaths. Suddenly, Alexandra's chest jerked violently. She coughed hard, then sucked in air like someone being pulled from the bottom of the ocean. Her eyelids fluttered. She was breathing. Bernard collapsed, his whole body trembling. His back is burning. His shoulders are raw. His hands are numb. But she was alive. He had saved her. The expensive suits swarmed her now, tripping over themselves in clumsy panic. "Ms. Ashcroft, Alexandra, stay with us." The boardroom doors burst open, and paramedics rushed in. They took over, lifting Alexandra onto the stretcher. One of them turned back and asked, "Who started CPR?" "I did," Bernard said, voice weak. He didn't get to say anything more before a tall man with silver hair stepped forward, his badge reading Tyler Brigham, CFO. His face twisted with disgust. "What's your name?" he demanded. "Bernard Kellerman," he said, standing up straight. "I'm a janitor." "You put your mouth on Ms. Ashcroft," the man said, as if Bernard had contaminated the CEO rather than saved her life. "She wasn't breathing," Bernard replied. "I'll be reviewing the security footage," the CFO snapped. "You need to leave immediately and do not return until contacted." Bernard's throat tightened. His back still throbbed. He looked around at the executives whose boss he had just saved from dying in front of them. Not a single thank you. Bernard bent down, grabbed his bucket with trembling hands, and pushed it out of the boardroom. Each step felt heavier than the last. But Bernard had no idea. The moment he walked out that door, something entirely different was unfolding inside the hospital. Something that would change his life forever. If you're following this story, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next chapters, where the truth behind Alexandra Ashcroft's collapse will shock you even more. That night, Bernard sat hunched in a hard bus seat, swallowed up by the crowd, his back curved as if he were trying to fold into himself and disappear from the world. City lights streaked past the window, stretching into long, blurred lines that reflected across his eyes both exhausted and hollow. By the time the bus dropped him off in his familiar neighborhood, night had already swallowed everything. The air held only the distant rumble of a freight train and the lively shouts of kids playing baseball in the alley, sounds that felt as though they belonged to a life far removed from his own. Molly ran to meet him at the door, barefoot, clutching her worn-out teddy bear. "You're home late," she said in a tiny, worried voice. "Are you okay, Daddy?" "I'm okay, sweetheart," Bernard answered, a lie he had grown far too used to saying. "Just a crazy day at work." Dinner was reheated mac and cheese and leftover stir-fried vegetables. Molly chattered about school, and Bernard nodded here and there, though his mind was still trapped somewhere inside that cold boardroom from earlier that morning. When Janet Holloway, the neighbor who watched Molly on night shifts, waved goodbye to head home, Bernard forced a smile, even though his lips felt heavy. When Molly fell asleep, he lay down on the thin mattress, listening to the heater sputter in the dark. His fingers brushed the bruise along his back, sharp, throbbing pain. He closed his eyes, but the image of Alexandra Ashcroft lying unconscious beneath his hands replayed over and over like an overexposed film. He had saved a woman's life, and yet all they saw was a poor janitor, a single father who dared to touch a billionaire. He didn't know that moment, the moment he breathed life back into someone fading away, was about to change his entire future. Just not in the way he hoped. The next morning, Bernard Kellerman stood in front of the Ashcroft Holdings Tower, wearing the same gray uniform he had pulled on for the past 3 months. The sun had barely risen, its soft amber light spilling across the plaza. He tightened his grip around his lunch bag, a plastic grocery sack holding a peanut butter sandwich, a bruised apple, and the hope that things would go back to normal. He took a deep breath and stepped toward the revolving door. But before he could touch the handle, an arm shot out in front of him. "Sir, you can't enter," the security guard said, his voice flat and emotionless. Bernard blinked. "What? I work here. Night shift. I'm on the 22nd floor." The guard didn't even look at him. "I was instructed not to let you in." A cold shiver ran down Bernard's spine. "Why?" I didn't do anything wrong." "Contact Human Resources," the man replied, turning away as if the matter were already settled. Bernard stood frozen at the entrance. The morning wind cut through his thin jacket as streams of office workers walked past him without stopping. He felt like a shadow, unseen when working, and now pushed completely out of sight. He circled around to the side entrance, clinging to the faint hope that this was all just a misunderstanding. Maybe someone forgot to update his shift schedule. Maybe they needed to talk to him about the CPR. Maybe, at the service desk, the night shift supervisor looked up, surprised. "Bernard Kellerman? Wait here." Bernard waited in the narrow hallway beside the row of staff lockers. His name was still written on locker number 7 in messy black marker, crooked, familiar. 10 minutes later, the supervisor returned. In his hand was a sealed envelope. His face was expressionless. "You're terminated," he said. Bernard felt something inside him snap, clean and brutal, like someone breaking a bone in his chest. "Terminated? But why? What did I do?" The supervisor shrugged. "HR said it's for inappropriate conduct involving senior personnel." "That's all I know." Bernard's hands trembled as he opened the envelope. Inside was a termination letter and his final paycheck. No severance, no further explanation. Just the words. Employment ended immediately. The phrase inappropriate conduct echoed in his skull like an alarm siren. Bernard stood there for a long time, in that narrow hallway, a single door closing behind him as neatly as a verdict. Back outside, life carried on as if nothing had happened. People in suits sipped their lattes, taxi horns blared, phones rang non-stop, and Bernard walked like an empty shell. He didn't remember how many blocks he passed. Everything blurred together. They think I did something wrong. They think I... He slumped onto a bus stop bench, his legs giving out beneath him. His phone buzzed. A message from a coworker, a screenshot, the group chat. See that? That janitor creep was all over Miss Ashcroft when she passed out. Looked like he was kissing her. Another, disgusting. Was that assault? Bernard's chest tightened. His fingers went cold. They had twisted the truth. CPR. The breaths that saved her life. They had turned it into something vile. His phone buzzed again. A blurry security cam still. But clear enough to hurt. Bernard is leaning down toward Alexandra Ashcroft. A moment of saving a life turned into damning evidence. Bernard let the phone drop onto his thigh. Above him, a giant billboard showed Alexandra Ashcroft smiling powerfully beside the slogan, Integrity, Vision, Leadership. He felt sick. The bus carried him back to the dim apartment in West Philadelphia. Molly ran out. You're home early? They fired me. Her eyes widened. Why? I don't know. He forced a smile. Just a misunderstanding. Janet watched him from the kitchen counter, the TV muted. You look like you've seen a ghost. I'm fine, Janet, Bernard replied. Another lie. Just tired. Night fell. He lay staring into the darkness, heater sputtering like it was complaining. Somewhere in the hallway, an argument erupted. Then a child cried softly. Life carried on, except Bernard's felt frozen in place. He turned his phone on. Messages kept flooding in. A voice message from the girl at the service department. Hey, I'm not sure what happened, but people are saying you did something inappropriate with Ms. Ashcroft. Maybe you should stay quiet for a while. He turned the phone off. Let it fall onto the mattress. Inappropriate. Such an easy word when people want to believe the worst. Bernard closed his eyes, remembering the moment Alexandra's chest jerked back to life under his hands. The first breath returning to her. He had saved someone. And now they treated him as if his hands were too poor, too dirty, too low to have the right to save a life. He buried his face in the pillow and cried. Saving someone should have been a good thing. But in this city, in this world, it was his own life being erased. Tomorrow, he would have to look for another job. Knock on doors. Clean whichever place would hire him. But tonight, the injustice was too heavy to bear. And he had no way of knowing that, high above the city in a penthouse glowing with soft lights, Alexandra Ashcroft jolted awake from a nightmare, clutching her chest, heart pounding, the echo of a strange voice pulling her back from the darkness. She just didn't know his name yet. Alexandra Ashcroft sat on the edge of her king-size bed, her entire body drenched in sweat. The early morning light slipped through the thin curtains of her penthouse, casting a soft but chilly pale gold wash across the room. Her heart pounded wildly in her chest as though it were trying to burst through her ribs. The nightmare had returned. The fourth night in a row. In it, she stood suspended in a pitch-black void, suffocating, her arms reaching out in desperate grasping. No light, no sound, only emptiness swallowing everything whole. Then suddenly, it appeared again. The voice. A man's voice, trembling yet steady, cutting through the darkness. Come on. Breathe. Come back. Each time she jolted awake, gasping as if dragged out of deep water, and each time, the name of the man behind that voice slipped through her memory before she could catch it. leaving only a familiar pull lingering in her chest. Alexandra rubbed her face, sat for one more breath, then rose, walking barefoot across the cool marble floor into the kitchen. The coffee machine beeped softly. The brew had been scheduled since the night before. Her assistant always ensured perfection down to the minute. As the rich scent of coffee filled the air, Alexandra leaned against the counter, eyes drifting down toward the city below. Philadelphia was waking up at her feet. Taxis, bicycles, and street vendors setting up their carts at the corners. And she stood on the 39th floor. Above it all, sealed off from the world by glass, money, and silence. But this morning, something felt off. She picked up her phone and scrolled through her emails. Contract approvals, press briefs, a video interview request from a PR firm. Nothing mentioning the incident. She opened Ashcroft Holdings' internal portal. Still nothing. Her brow tightened. Someone had saved her life. The doctors had been clear. She had gone into sudden cardiac arrest. Survival rates in cases like that were under 10% without immediate CPR. Meaning someone had kept her heart beating, breath by breath, until the paramedics arrived. And yet, no one had told her who it was. Her executives had been polite, but evasive. The situation has been handled, ma'am. We've taken the appropriate internal measures, Ms. Ashcroft. Those answers made her skin prickle. Who had placed their hands on her chest? Who had pressed their mouth against hers? Breathing life back into her lungs. Every time she closed her eyes, her mind drifted to that dream. That voice, raspy with strain yet unwavering, pulling her back from the edge. She could almost feel those hands again. The pressure on her ribs, the heat of breath near her face. Who was he? Why wouldn't anyone tell her? Alexandra Ashcroft was not the type to be kept in the dark. Not in her own company, and certainly not concerning her own survival. She picked up her phone and dialed a familiar number. "Marcus," she said, as the head of security answered, "I want the security footage from the boardroom on the morning of the incident." "Ma'am, HR has already reviewed the recording. Legal is holding a copy." "I didn't ask who reviewed it," Alexandra replied, her voice sharpening. "I want it in my inbox. Right now." "Yes, ma'am." She ended the call and turned back toward the window. This time, the glass only reflected faint fog and her own face. She looked pale, exhausted, distant, like someone pulled back from the edge without ever knowing who reached out to her. A woman whose life had been returned to her, but not the truth. 20 minutes later, the email arrived. Alexandra opened the video file. On the screen, she saw herself, captured by the cold, indifferent eye of a surveillance camera. She was standing at the head of the long glass conference table, gesturing mid-speech, then stuttering. One hand flew up to her chest. Her mouth moved, but no sound came. Her body wavered, then collapsed like a soaked sheet onto the floor. People around her jumped to their feet. Someone screamed. Another darted their gaze around, but no one stepped toward her. Then the door at the far end of the room flew open. A man in a gray janitor's uniform entered, pushing a mop bucket. Alexandra instinctively leaned closer to the screen. At first, he looked startled, but when he saw her on the ground, he dropped everything and lunged forward. Without hesitation, he knelt beside her and checked for a pulse. His hands moved fast, urgent. He pinched her nose, performed rescue breaths, then laced his fingers over her sternum and counted each compression out loud. She watched his face closely, his clenched jaw, his tear-rimmed eyes, the look burning with fear and determination. He ignored the shouts behind him, the pointing fingers, the lips mouthing accusations. He focused on one thing only, keeping her alive. And then she saw it. Another man approached, Tyler Brigham, her chief financial officer, his face twisted with anger and disgust. He grabbed the janitor's shoulder and yanked him away from her. Alexandra hit pause. Her hands shook. She watched the rest of the footage in silence. The janitor was escorted out, like a criminal. No handshake, no thank you, no acknowledgement. He had saved her life and was punished for it. Alexandra rose slowly. Her chest tightened, not from her heart condition, but from another emotion rising up inside her. Fury. She called again. "Marcus," she said, her voice now low and cold as steel. "Where is Bernard Kellerman?" "Ma'am?" "The man in the video." "The janitor. What happened to him?" There was a brief silence on the other end. "He was terminated by HR. There were certain allegations." "Allegations?" Alexandra nearly hissed. "He saved my life." "Ma'am, there were concerns about optics, liability, media risk." "Then listen carefully," Alexandra cut him off. "Find him. Address, file, everything. I want it all on my desk before noon." "But yes, Ms. Ashcroft." She hung up, exhaling slowly. Her perfectly pristine kitchen suddenly felt uncomfortably empty. For the first time since waking up in the hospital, she felt something crack beneath her sternum. Not pain, shame. Far below, in distant West Philadelphia, Bernard Kellerman knew nothing. He didn't know she had watched the footage, didn't know she was replaying the image of his face, didn't know the world that had already crushed him once was about to tremble again. But he would. Very soon. 3 days passed, and Bernard Kellerman still hadn't found a job. His mornings slipped by in silence, with only the sound of an old red pen he'd found wedged in the sofa, scratching circles around job listings in the classifieds. In the afternoons, he went door to door, laundromats, diners, cleaning companies, any place that might pay enough to keep the lights in his small apartment from going out. But everywhere, the answer was the same. A hesitant look, a hushed whisper, then a polite shake of the head, colder than the winter air outside. By the morning of the 4th day, the name Bernard Kellerman had become a rumor spreading like smoke. At the laundromat on the corner, a young woman folding clothes glanced over at him and said quietly, "You're the guy from that building, right? The one who—" She trailed off when he looked up. "Never mind. It's nothing." Bernard tried to smile, but it never reached his eyes. "It's okay," he said softly. "You can say it. The man who tried to save someone and got fired for it." She pressed her lips together, her voice dropping lower. People say you did more than that." Bernard didn't ask what more than that meant. He already knew. The internet had taken his CPR and twisted it into something filthy. Trashy blogs blasted headlines like, "Janitor couldn't keep his hands to himself," "Crossing the line with unconscious female CEO." Someone had leaked a still frame from the security footage. Blurry, grainy, but clear enough to plant doubt. The image of him bending down to perform CPR had become evidence. Back home, the small apartment smelled like old carpet and reheated coffee. Janet Holloway sat by the window, wearing her reading glasses and holding a large print newspaper. "The city council rejected the minimum wage raise again," she muttered, then looked up. "Have you eaten yet?" "Not yet," Bernard said, rinsing a mug in the sink. "Let me fix something for Molly first." The girl shuffled into the kitchen, hair tousled, rubbing her eyes. "Daddy, are you going to work today?" "Not today, sweetheart," Bernard answered gently. "I'm taking a little break." "Oh," Molly frowned. "Miss Janet said people are being mean to you. Why?" Bernard bent down and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Sometimes people are afraid of things they don't understand. But things will be okay. I promise." Janet sighed and folded the newspaper. "Son, you can't fight the ones who write the stories. They always win." "I don't want to fight," Bernard said quietly. "I just want them to tell the truth." That afternoon, he took the bus to a small cleaning service on 18th Street. The owner, a heavy-set man in a dress shirt that smelled like cigar smoke, glanced over his paperwork, then set it down on the desk. "You used to work at Ashcroft Holdings?" "Yes, sir." The man nodded slowly, crossing his arms. I've heard about that situation. I can't afford that kind of attention here. I'm sorry. Bernard's throat went dry. Attention? You mean saving someone's life? I mean, the man said bluntly, controversy. Clients don't like trouble. Try somewhere else. When Bernard stepped back outside, the sky had darkened. Wind sliced through his thin coat as he walked along the cracked sidewalk toward the bus stop. A group of teenagers stood outside a convenience store, their phones glowing blue. As he passed, one nudged his friend and spoke loud enough for Bernard to hear, "Yo, that's him, the janitor guy. I saw the clip. Dude was kissing that billionaire lady for real." Laughter burst out, chasing Bernard down the block. By the time he reached the bus stop, his eyes were burning. He sat down, head bowed, arms wrapped around himself as if he could keep from breaking apart. When he got home, Janet was on the phone, her voice tense and hushed. Seeing him, she cupped a hand over the receiver. "It's your sister," she said quietly. "She says people at church are talking. They saw some video online." Bernard closed his eyes. Of course they had. That night, he tried to delete his social media accounts, but every time he did, another fake profile popped up with his picture and vicious captions. Single dad hunting billionaire. Man who assaulted female CEO. He shut the phone off. Sat in the dark. The silence was so deep that the hum of the refrigerator sounded like the only noise left in the world. When he finally lay down beside Molly, his body felt like lead. His back still ached from the blows he'd taken in the boardroom. He pressed his hand over the bruise, remembering that sharp, dull sound, the crack of impact, the breath forced out of his lungs. "Justice isn't blind," he whispered. "It just refuses to look down." In the middle of the night, the phone rang. He jolted awake and fumbled to answer. "Mr. Kellerman?" A voice, sharp, cold, and scripted. "Yes?" "This is Human Resources from Ashcroft Holdings. Our internal investigation is complete." His heart lurched. "So does that mean I can—" "Your employment has been terminated effective immediately," the woman cut in. "The internal review has determined your conduct to be inappropriate. We will not be pursuing charges, but we strongly advise you not to return to the premises." Bernard shot upright, turning to stone. "Inappropriate? I was performing CPR. She wasn't breathing." "The decision is final, Mr. Kellerman. Your last check will be mailed to you." The call ended. The line went dead, clean and merciless, as if he had never existed at all. For a long moment, Bernard just sat there with the phone pressed to his ear, staring into the dark. Molly shifted beside him, mumbling something about pancakes in her sleep. He turned to look at her, his chest aching. What was he supposed to tell her in the morning? That her father lose his job for saving someone's life? That the truth doesn't matter when the one telling it is poor and invisible? Bernard leaned back against the headboard, his eyes burning. "God," he whispered, "if you're listening, what am I supposed to do now?" Outside, thunder rolled. Rain began to drum against the window. The leaky gutter tapped a steady rhythm, like a heartbeat. A mocking, tireless beat. On the other side of the city, in a brightly lit penthouse, Alexandra Ashcroft sat in front of her laptop. The video had finished playing, but the image of Bernard kneeling beside her was still burned into her mind. She saw the fear on his face, the determination, the courage, and the horror as he was dragged away like a criminal. She hit pause again, leaned back in her chair, shoulders rigid. She had built a billion-dollar empire on decisive choices and faith in the chain of command. But this had slipped past her like smoke, and it had nearly destroyed a man. Her jaw tightened. "Find him," she murmured into the quiet room, "before this goes too far." Alexandra Ashcroft didn't call her driver. She pulled on jeans, a sweater, and grabbed her own car keys. The black Mercedes glided through the city like a shadow as she headed west. watching the glass and steel towers gradually give way to old brick buildings, peeling murals, and windows boarded with warped plywood. It had been a long time since she'd driven herself anywhere. This feeling felt right. The neighborhood where Bernard lived was a world entirely different from the kingdom of glass and gold she commanded. Potholes rattled her wheels. Kids played on muddy lots, chasing each other around rusted cars. A man sold hot dogs from a battered cart, steam rising in thick white clouds in the biting cold. She found the address, a low brown building with peeling paint and a sagging metal staircase. She parked, stepped out, and the December air slashed at her neck like a knife. She knocked. A few seconds of silence passed before the door creaked open. A little girl appeared, hair tied up hastily, t-shirt too thin for the weather. Her eyes widened. You're the lady from the billboard," she whispered. "I'm looking for Bernard," Alexandra said, softening her voice. "He lives here, doesn't he?" The girl's face pinched with worry. "He's sick," she said quietly. "He won't get up. I tried making soup. I tried giving him medicine. Nothing worked. He just keeps saying he's tired. Then he lies down again." Alexandra's throat tightened. "How long has he been like this?" "Since he lost his job," the girl replied. "He stopped eating. He kept saying, 'It's not fair.' Then he just stopped." Alexandra pushed the door open and stepped inside. The apartment was tiny. Faded walls, a heater rumbling but barely warming the room. Bernard lay curled on a thin mattress, tucked into the corner, wrapped in 2 worn blankets. His face was gaunt, cheeks hollow, breath frighteningly shallow. She knelt beside him. "Bernard," she whispered. "It's me, Alexandra Ashcroft." He didn't move. She took his hand. It burned with fever. "Call an ambulance," she shouted toward the hallway. "Now!" The girl stood frozen in the corner, clutching a ragged teddy bear, eyes wide. Alexandra squeezed Bernard's hand harder. "You saved my life," she said, her voice cracking. "Now, it's my turn to save yours." When the distant wail of sirens began echoing through the street, she looked at the man who had pulled her back from death and understood one thing clearly. This time, she could not let him slip away. The ambulance pulled up in front of the building, lights spinning silently. Paramedics worked fast, asking quick, clipped questions. Alexandra barely registered the moment Bernard's limp body was lifted onto the stretcher. All she knew was that she stepped into the ambulance after him without hesitation, ignoring the neighbors peeking out from windows and porches. Inside the vehicle, a paramedic clipped an oxygen monitor to Bernard's finger and wrapped a blood pressure cuff around his arm. Severe dehydration, fever above 103, shallow breathing. "How long has this been going on?" he asked. Alexandra gripped the edge of her seat. "I don't know. I just found him like this." "No, this is systemic stress," the paramedic muttered, hanging an IV bag from the hook above. "We've got to stabilize him fast." The ambulance jolted as it turned onto a main road. Alexandra glanced down at Bernard's face, ashen, sunken, beads of sweat on his forehead. She reached out, carefully slipping her hand back into his, avoiding the IV tubing. His fingers didn't move, but she didn't let go. "You fought to keep me alive," she murmured. "Don't quit now." "Hold on," the paramedic said suddenly, eyes widening as recognition flashed across his face. "You're Alexandra Ashcroft." Alexandra nodded stiffly. He looked from her to Bernard. "He's the one who—" "Yes," she said. The paramedic didn't say more, but his expression shifted. Something like respect. 20 minutes later, they arrived at a private medical center on the north side, one of the best in the city. Alexandra had called ahead. A team of doctors and nurses waited at the emergency entrance and swiftly took over, pushing Bernard through the double doors. Alexandra followed until a nurse gently lifted a hand to stop her. "We'll take care of him, Ms. Ashcroft. Please wait here." She nodded, stepping back, eyes staying on the stretcher until it disappeared beyond the swinging doors. The waiting room was nearly perfect. Soft leather chairs, warm lighting, a piano in the corner playing gentle jazz. But to Alexandra, everything felt submerged, muffled. She sat, stood, paced, sat again. She called Fiona Redford, her legal assistant. He's at Northside Medical. Cancel everything for the next 2 days and bring his daughter, Molly, here. She's alone at home. I'll do it right away, Fiona said, without a moment of hesitation. When Molly arrived with a social worker about an hour later, Alexandra was standing by the window, watching thin snowflakes fall across the Philadelphia skyline. She turned when she heard the girl's voice. Is my dad okay? She knelt to be at eye level with Molly. The doctors are taking care of him. Your dad is very strong. He saved my life once, remember? I believe he can do it again. Molly nodded, trying to be brave, hugging her teddy bear tight. I made soup for him, but he wouldn't eat. I tried my best. You did more than your best, Alexandra said gently. You cared for him, the way he cared for me. A nurse appeared at the doorway. Ms. Ashcroft, you can see him now. Alexandra stood, took Molly's hand, and followed the nurse through a quiet hallway into a private room. Bernard lay on the bed, an oxygen tube beneath his nose. V fluid dripping steadily into his arm. His chest rose and fell slowly, steadily. He'll pull through, the nurse said softly. Severe exhaustion, dehydration, malnutrition. His immune system crashed under stress. But he's responding well. His vitals are improving. Alexandra let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Thank you, she said. Molly stepped to the bedside and placed her teddy bear on her father's chest. I took care of you, Daddy, she whispered. Alexandra stood beside the bed, looking at Bernard. His face was less gray now, the lines softer, less shattered. She pulled up a chair, sat down, and stayed there for a long time. At one point, Molly fell asleep in the corner, curled up under a hospital blanket. A nurse brought in hot soup and crackers. Alexandra barely touched hers. She only sat, watching Bernard, her mind spinning through layers of guilt and doubt. She remembered the board meeting the morning he had walked in, the way no one looked at him, the way even she hadn't spared him a glance. He had stepped into that room like air, and yet that invisible man had been the one to save her life. It hadn't just been a CPR procedure. It had been defiance of power, facing fear, standing against a system that expected him to bow his head, stay silent, and disappear. She couldn't erase what had happened, but she could and would change everything that happened next. Hours passed. Night settled in completely. The only sounds were the steady beeps of the monitors and Molly's soft breathing. Then, without warning, Bernard stirred. His eyelids fluttered, his fingers twitched. Alexandra shot to her feet. Bernard! His head tilted, eyes opening, blinking several times before coming into focus. Where? Am I? He rasped. You're in the hospital, she said gently. You collapsed. But you're safe now. He frowned, voice barely a whisper. Why? Why are you here? She knelt beside the bed, her voice weighted. Because I watched the footage, all of it, every second. I saw what you did. You saved my life, and they punished you for it. Bernard, I'm truly sorry. Tears welled in his eyes. They said I assaulted you. I know, she answered, jaw tightening. They lied, and I let them lie on my behalf. But it won't be like that anymore. He turned away, blinking hard. It doesn't matter. I'm just a janitor. Someone like me. No one believes, no matter what I say. I believe you, she said slowly. Not just because I saw the video, but because I felt it. In that moment, you were the only one who did anything, the only one who didn't turn away. Bernard looked back at her, His voice was weak but clear. Then help me. Not just with doctors or bills. Help me be seen. Help my daughter grow up in a world where doing the right thing doesn't mean losing everything. Alexandra nodded, once, then again, firmer. I will. She stood, looking at him one more time, then whispered, You're not invisible anymore. Morning light slipped through the hospital curtains, drawing quiet streaks across the pale green wall. Bernard was asleep, his breathing now steady, his face no longer ashen, but softer, warmer. Beside him, Alexandra Ashcroft sat back in an armchair, elbows resting on her knees, eyes never leaving the man who had shaken her entire world, simply by doing what no one else had dared to do. All night, she hadn't left the room. The weight of guilt still clung to her shoulders like a wet blanket, heavy, cold, suffocating. For a woman who had built a billion-dollar empire by making hard decisions and respecting the chain of command, this had slipped through her fingers like smoke, and it had almost swept away an entire human life. She took out her phone and opened Bernard's file. Fiona had stayed up all night piecing together everything she could find, stitching it into a full picture that the rest of the world had carelessly thrown away. Name, Bernard James Kellerman. Age, 34. Education, high school diploma. 1 year of community college and nursing, dropped out due to financial hardship. Employment history, cleaning services, part-time elderly care, food delivery. Family, 1 daughter, Molly. Ex-wife, Charlotte Reed. Charlotte's custody was revoked by the court 3 years ago. Address, West Philadelphia. Known for high crime rates, decaying infrastructure, and being forgotten by the city. There were even notes from previous landlords attached to a filed eviction notice. He had been 2 months behind on rent. His electricity had been cut off the week before. Alexandra swallowed hard. All of this had happened after he saved her life. She stood and stepped into the hallway. A nurse pushed a cart past and nodded politely. Alexandra walked to a small, quiet corner near the family waiting area, leaned back against the wall, pulled out her phone, and called Fiona. Yes, Ms. Ashcroft, Fiona answered almost immediately. Send 2 cars to West Philadelphia. 1 to pick up his daughter, 1 to pick up the neighbor who's been watching her. I want them moved to temporary housing, fully furnished, safe, close to a good school. Understood. And call Dr. Morrison. Tell him I want the neighbor, Janet Holloway, to have a full exam today. Comprehensive medical checkup. I'll arrange it. And one more thing, Fiona, Alexandra added, her voice softening just a bit. Make sure there's a small bed or crib ready in the new place, just in case Molly is too scared to sleep alone. There was a pause on the other end. I understand, ma'am. Alexandra hung up and went back to the room. Bernard was awake now, propped up on pillows. His eyes were still heavy with exhaustion, but far clearer than the night before. Molly sat beside him, legs swinging off the edge of the chair, coloring intently with a set of pencils a nurse had scrounged up somewhere. When she saw Alexandra come in, the girl looked up and beamed. Hi, Ms. Ashcroft. Hi, Molly. How's your dad? He's better now, the girl chirped, holding up her drawing. He smiled when I showed him this. Alexandra turned to Bernard. You're back with us now, aren't you? It's not like I had anywhere else to go, he replied dryly, though the corner of his mouth twitched. You really watched the footage? She nodded. All of it? All of it, Alexandra confirmed. I watched you fight to keep me alive while everyone else stood frozen. And then I watched them treat you like a criminal. Bernard, I am deeply sorry. Bernard tilted his head back, staring up at the ceiling. Sorry doesn't change what they did. No, she agreed, but it's a starting point. And so is this. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a neatly folded sheet of paper. This is an official statement, signed and notarized under my name, clearing your record. It states that your actions were emergency medical intervention, life-saving, and entirely appropriate under the circumstances. No misconduct, no violation. He hesitated before taking it. His fingers trembled slightly as he unfolded the page. His eyes scanned each line, his lips parting ever so slightly. "And there's more," Alexandra continued. "I've had your daughter and your neighbor move to a safe, fully furnished apartment, free of charge until you're back on your feet. And I want to offer you a position." He snapped his head up. "What? No, you don't have to." "I do," she cut in, though her voice remained gentle. "Because I allowed them to dismantle your life under my name. I can't erase what they've done, but I can make sure that from now on, you're never left standing alone again." He swallowed hard, blinking rapidly. "Why? Why do you care now?" She fell silent for a moment, choosing her words. "Because when I was on the edge of death, I didn't see a janitor. I saw a man fighting to keep me alive. And after I survived, I let the world erase you. That made me complicit. And I don't want to be that person anymore." Molly looked up and cut in. "I told you, Dad. She's a good person." Bernard exhaled, half laugh, half surrender. "You've always been better at judging people than I am." Alexandra smiled faintly. "There's one more thing, if you're willing to hear it. I want to offer you a role, not in cleaning. You would be the director of a new employee welfare program I'm launching at Ashcroft Holdings." Bernard's eyes widened. "Excuse me. What?" "I want you to help design a system that makes sure no one gets left behind again, especially the people who keep the lights on and the floors clean. I want you to be the one to rebuild what I've allowed to rot." He stared at her, stunned. "Last night you said something," she went on, "that you didn't just need help, you needed to be seen. That line has been looping in my head ever since." Bernard gripped the edge of the blanket. "I don't have the qualifications for something like that." "You do," Alexandra said, stepping closer. "Because you understand. You know what it feels like to be treated as invisible. And now you have the chance to change that for others." Bernard glanced at Molly, then back at Alexandra. "I need time to think." "Of course," she nodded. "Take all the time you need." She turned to leave, but paused at the door, looking back over her shoulder. "Oh, Bernard, you saved me once. Maybe this is my chance to return the favor." The door closed behind her. Bernard leaned his head back against the pillow, the statement still in his hand. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of his story. Maybe it was only the beginning. 2 days later, Bernard crossed the threshold of the new apartment for the first time. His legs still shook after days in the hospital, and his right hand was bandaged where the IV had been for nearly 48 hours. But all of that suddenly felt small. He stood still for a long moment in the middle of the living room, just to look. Warm, golden light washed over the cozy space. No more cracked, peeling walls. No more flickering ceiling bulb that couldn't decide between on and off. No more wheezing old heater, coughing in the corner. Instead, there was a beige sofa with clean cushions, a low wooden coffee table, a soft rug underfoot, and curtains matching the walls. The apartment carried a faint scent of lemon mingled with the smell of new fabric, like the scent of a beginning. Molly shot past him, eyes wide. Laughter ringing. "We have our own kitchen, Daddy. Look, there's even cereal in the cabinet." Bernard blinked, fighting down the salt rising at the corners of his eyes. Janet, their neighbor, stepped in slowly behind them, leaning on the new walker the hospital had given her. Her back was still bent, her legs still stiff, but her eyes were brighter than they'd been in weeks. "Oh, my Lord," Janet muttered. "I haven't seen a place this clean and decent since your Aunt Beatrice's wedding." Bernard laughed, the sound still shaky but genuine. The three of them stepped fully inside and closed the door, like closing an old chapter. For the first time in a long time, they didn't feel like they were squatting in a place that didn't want them. This time, this was their home, On the kitchen counter sat a welcome package with his name on it. Next to it, a small vase of white daisies. A card was tucked under the base. "You deserve peace. A.A." Bernard folded the card and pressed it lightly to his chest, as if pinning down a memory. In the days since leaving the hospital, he hadn't seen Alexandra in person again. But her fingerprints were everywhere. Private medical care for him and Janet, a full-service moving company, pre-booked therapy sessions for Molly. The job offer is still sitting in his email inbox. She didn't push. She didn't call to demand an answer. She simply opened a space for him to choose. And right now, that was what he appreciated most. He stepped into the kitchen and took in the gleam of stainless steel appliances. In the fridge, there was a loaf of bread, a carton of milk, a pack of eggs, more than he'd had at once in weeks. Molly opened a cabinet and pulled out a box of colored pencils. "There's paper, too. Daddy, I get to draw again." Janet eased herself onto a bar stool at the kitchen counter, her eyes sweeping the room. "Son, you sure this isn't some kind of trap? No landlord is this kind without wanting something back." Bernard turned to her. "She hasn't asked me for anything." Janet narrowed her eyes, still skeptical. "No one gives this much without wanting something, sooner or later." Bernard was quiet for a few seconds before he answered. "She's not handing down charity. She's giving me back justice. And maybe this is how she's doing it." Janet snorted softly. "Justice is supposed to show up before they drag your name through the mud, not after everything's already broken." Bernard didn't argue. He didn't know how to anyway. He walked into the small bedroom at the end of the hallway. A queen-size bed with clean sheets, a wardrobe, a bedside lamp, no moldy windows, no chipped corners on the wall. On the nightstand sat a small stack of books, titles on leadership, employee welfare, and one about surviving public scandal. On the last book's cover, a sticky note was attached. "Page 47. It once helped me. A.A." Bernard let out a faint, almost disbelieving chuckle, then sat on the edge of the bed, running his hand over the soft comforter. From the living room, Molly's voice drifted in. "Daddy, can I go downstairs and see the little garden?" "Later, sweetheart," Bernard called back. "We've got a lot of boxes to unpack first." Janet shuffled to the doorway with her walker, leaning against the frame as she looked at him. "You really thinking about taking that job?" Bernard looked up, honest. "I don't know yet. Just hearing about it is scary." Janet's voice softened unexpectedly. "You knelt in the middle of a boardroom and faced down death without your hands shaking. And now an office job scares you?" "It's not the job," Bernard said quietly. "It's being seen." That night, after Molly had fallen asleep in the twin bed with the dinosaur sheets she'd picked from a catalog, and Janet was settled on the couch in the living room, Bernard stepped out onto the small balcony. City lights glittered in the distance, not so far that he felt cut off, but far enough to remind him how far he'd come in just a few days. He sat down in the wicker chair, pulled a light blanket around his shoulders, and let his thoughts spill freely. The injustice was still there. The rumors online hadn't vanished overnight. People still whispered his name at the corner store. His phone still buzzed occasionally with anonymous messages. But in this quiet moment, he felt something unfamiliar. Hope. Not safety. Not yet. But the sense that things were still capable of changing. His phone buzzed. A new message from Alexandra Ashcroft. "No pressure, but I'd be honored if you'd come see the new office space. It's yours to shape. Whatever you dream up, start there." Below was an attachment, a photo of an empty office floor. Wide windows, sunlight pouring in, freshly painted walls, spotless floors waiting for the first footsteps. Bernard stared at it for a long time. He could almost see it. A place without front doors for the wealthy and back doors for the cleaners. A place where benefits meant more than a bowl of fruit in the break room. a place where voices like his weren't just allowed to exist, but needed. He typed back, "I'll come take a look, one step at a time." His fingers hovered. Then he added, "Thank you for giving me room to breathe." He set the phone down, leaned back, and closed his eyes. And for the first time in weeks, Bernard slept without waking in fear. Next Monday, Bernard stood in front of the gleaming glass building in River North. The wind carried the smell of freshly roasted coffee, and the sidewalk was still glossy from the rain. He adjusted his scarf and looked up at the sign. Ashcroft Holdings Executive Annex. Fiona's message was still there. "Third floor, elevator on the right. She'll be waiting." As he stepped into the lobby, Bernard could clearly feel eyes on him, but this time it wasn't suspicion or wariness. It was recognition. The security guard nodded at him. The receptionist smiled warmly. Just small gestures, but to Bernard, they were the kind of acknowledgement he had never truly had before. The elevator chimed. The doors opened, lifting him to a completely empty open floor. Only flooded sunlight and a wide view of the river in the distance. Alexandra Ashcroft stood by the window, coffee cup in hand. "I was starting to wonder if you'd changed your mind," she said, still looking out. "I almost did," Bernard admitted. "Twice, right before I walked out the door. But I'm very glad you came anyway." Bernard walked slowly around the space. "This place feels different. Less cold." "That's intentional," she replied. "This entire floor is yours, for the new department." "Still trying to convince me to take the job?" He raised an eyebrow. Alexandra smiled. "I just want you to know, this door is open. And if anyone deserves to design an employee welfare program, it's someone who knows what it feels like to be overlooked." Bernard looked out through the clear glass, the river glinting, boats moving beneath the bridges. "I've never had an office. The only keys I ever owned were for a supply closet and a mop cabinet." "Then it's time you had another key," she said calmly. "Why are you really doing this?" he asked, this time looking straight at her. Alexandra didn't look away. "Because when I was lying on that floor, right between life and death, I realized I didn't deserve half the respect people gave me. Not the way you did. Power without responsibility is just an illusion. And I've had enough of that illusion." She pulled out a thick sketch pad and a marker. "All of this is yours." Bernard opened to the first page, completely blank. He took the pen and drew a breath. "I want windows in every working room, real light. No more break rooms that look like broom closets. And I want a real welfare fund, transportation support, childcare, rent assistance, not just a couple of yoga classes for the sake of pretty photos." Alexandra scribbled notes quickly. "You're demanding." "I'm not here to demand," Bernard said, his voice firm. "I'm here to build." An hour passed. The sketch on the table was filled with boxes and arrows, support office, counseling rooms, a space where employees could wait for their kids, a quiet area for night shift workers. "So, am I supposed to take this as you saying yes?" Alexandra asked. "I'm saying yes," he nodded. "Not because I want to work for you, but because I want to work for the people you, and this whole system, used to forget. People like me." "That's the best yes I've ever heard," she replied. Bernard paused at the doorway and turned back. "Thank you, Alexandra. Not just for the job, but for choosing to see me." "I should have done that sooner," she said quietly. "We all see things too late at some point," he smiled. "What matters is what we choose to do once we finally see them." Across the city, in a dim conference room lit only by warm yellow lamps, Tyler Brigham poured bourbon with a trembling hand. The news had already reached him, and it made him feel sick. Alexandra was building a new department, and she had just put him in charge of it. That janitor. Tyler glanced down at his phone. The image hit him full in the face. Bernard standing beside his daughter in the press release. The headline screamed, Ashcroft appoints Bernard Kellerman as Director of Employee Welfare Initiative, a step toward justice in the workplace. Tyler's jaw clenched, veins standing out along his neck. For years, he had been the one crafting this HR ecosystem. Quiet firings, hush agreements, files pushed into the dark. And now, a man from the supply closet had been handed a chair Tyler had always seen as an extension of his own power. He dialed a number. "It's Brigham. I need something done. Quietly. Off the books." The voice on the other end was low. "Go on. Find me anything on Bernard Kellerman. Old debts, erased records, juvenile offenses, anything. I want him discredited." "That's going to cost you." "I didn't ask the price," Tyler growled. "I asked if you could do it." The next morning, rain hammered the windows like impatient knocking. Bernard stood by the sink, holding a mug of cold coffee without realizing it. There was a strange feeling in his chest, as if something was waiting for him, and it wasn't good. His phone buzzed, a message from Fiona. "Call me now. Something's up." Bernard dialed immediately. "There's been a leak." Fiona got straight to the point. "Your old eviction records, hospital papers, even a sealed juvenile misdemeanor. Someone's trying to smear you, Bernard." "Brigham," Bernard said softly, without needing to think. "Alexandra is furious," Fiona added. "Let her be," he replied, his voice oddly calm. "I'm not hiding." When he arrived at the Ashcroft Annex, the air was strung tight like a wire. Rumors had raced ahead of him by miles. But Bernard walked in with his head held high. On his desk lay a bright bouquet of sunflowers and a handwritten card. "The truth is always louder than the noise. Keep walking. AA." Within an hour, he requested an all-staff meeting for the annex. The room filled quickly. Administrative staff, security guards, cafeteria workers, maintenance crew, day shift cleaners, night shift cleaners. Bernard stood in front of them with no notes, no slides, just his hands trembling slightly. "Some of you have probably seen the headlines out there already," he began. "There are people who want you to believe that a person's past is enough to erase their future. That one mistake, or one messy record, should be enough to silence them forever." He walked slowly along the front row. "I don't believe that." He stopped and looked at each face, tired, curious, skeptical, hopeful. "Yes, I've faced eviction. Yes, I've had overdue bills. Yes, when I was 16, I had a minor charge for stealing cough medicine for my mom. She was sick, and we didn't have the money. That record was sealed years ago." He drew a deep breath. "I'm not ashamed of any of that. Those things are part of who I am." This space was created for the people who never get a seat at the big table, for the ones who've cried in the supply closet and still walked out smiling the next day, for those who've been ignored but kept working anyway. He swept his gaze across the room again. "You don't have to be perfect to fight for justice. You just have to be willing to show up, and I'm standing here." There was a thick moment of silence. Then someone started clapping. A second pair of hands joined in, then a third. Within seconds, the entire room was filled with applause like rolling thunder, swelling into a heavy, pulsing rhythm. Across town, Alexandra sat with the legal team in a conference room, a screen in front of them crowded with emails and documents. Evidence of the smear campaign was right there. "I want his badge revoked," Alexandra said, her voice as cold as steel. "Today." "It's ready," Fiona replied. "We were waiting for your sign-off." "And one more thing," Alexandra continued. "Anyone who targets Bernard Kellerman is targeting this company's core values, and they will answer to me." 6 months later, Bernard stood on stage at a national conference on labor justice. This time, he wasn't appearing with a mop and cart, but with a presentation, a team, and his name printed clearly on the main speaker lineup. The welfare program he'd designed had officially launched across the company. In the first month alone, more than 200 reports had been submitted. 7 managers had been fired. 12 employees had been promoted after unfair evaluations were reviewed. Molly sat in the front row, legs swinging, eyes shining, her proud smile impossible to hide. Janet, stronger now after months of physical therapy, clapped the loudest every time Bernard's name was mentioned. Alexandra chose a seat farther back, not to take the spotlight, but just to listen. "My name is Bernard Kellerman," he began, voice low but steady. "And I'm not the kind of flawless hero you usually see on posters." A few soft laughs rippled through the room. "I don't have a spotless record. I wasn't born into wealth. I was a janitor, a single dad, a man who saw something wrong and decided not to look away. I didn't decide to speak up because I wanted attention. I did it because there are real people being hurt, ignored, manipulated, stripped of their voice. People like me. If that makes me troublesome, then I hope more of us are willing to stand up and cause that kind of trouble." When he finished, Molly didn't wait a second. She ran straight onto the stage and threw her arms around him. "You did so well, Daddy," Bernard laughed, pulling her close. "We did well, sweetheart. This is for all of us." Alexandra walked up as the applause still rolled through the hall. "You've changed this company, Bernard. Not just the people, but the culture," she said. "We've still got a long way to go," he replied. "Yes, but at least now we're walking in the right direction." That night, Bernard sat on the balcony of their new apartment, bigger, brighter, but still simple. He looked out at Philadelphia spread beneath him, city lights flickering like tiny promises in the dark. His phone buzzed, a message from June. "Just got word. We've been asked to consult for 3 more companies. They want to apply the model you built." Bernard smiled. The change was spreading. He wrote back, "Let's do it. One safe workplace at a time." Molly stepped out onto the balcony, wrapped in a blanket. "Are you cold, Dad?" "No, sweetheart." He pulled her into his lap. "I was just thinking how sometimes the worst things that happen to us are the ones that lead us to the best things." Molly curled up against him. "So now, are you happy?" Bernard held his daughter tighter and looked out at the breathing city. "Yeah, baby. Finally, I'm happy." They sat like that, father and daughter, on the small balcony overlooking the city. For the first time in his life, Bernard felt seen, not as an anonymous employee, not as the victim of a scandal, but as a human being who deserved his own seat at the table. And he knew that from here on, he would use that seat to make sure others got theirs too. The journey of Bernard Kellerman shows us that courage isn't always loud, grand gestures. Sometimes it lives in small but unwavering choices, choosing integrity over convenience, speaking up instead of staying silent, standing tall when the world wants you to bow. This story reminds us that justice doesn't ask for perfection. It asks that we refuse to let fear define our truth. No matter where you come from, no matter how the world sees you, your voice still matters. And when that voice is used with clear purpose and steady conviction, it can become a force strong enough to change an entire system.